Hello, everyone. Welcome to our business analytics final presentation. Our group decided to use the 1994 United States Census data in order to determine the answers to our descriptive, prescriptive, and optimization questions. Our questions are meant to determine the group of individuals who are most likely to make over $50,000 annually and if the individuals who are receiving that amount are deserving or not. Our data is taken from the 1994 United States Census, where both controllable, for example, education, and uncontrollable, for example, race, traits, are taken into consideration. The question's agency is to easily comprehend the data and determine patterns between the different variables versus the income. The questions that we will be exploring are, for descriptive analytics, what occupation gives an individual the best chance to make more than $50,000 annually? For prescriptive analytics, what types of individuals are most likely to make over $50,000 annually? And using all explanatory variables, what level of education is expected? For optimization analytics, given the people most likely to earn over $50,000, which of these people should a bank most likely give a loan to based on their capital gain?
In order to do the methodology section of our data set, we first had to import the data set and allow for the missing cells to be actually empty rather than represented by the question mark they were currently holding, which is represented by line 3 of the code. After this occurred, we then had to empty these cells fully using the following code in order to see our actual missing cells represented in line 9 by not all values represented of the same. This is also seen in line 10 by seeing what values are actually missing in which cells, and the percentage in line 11. After this, we dropped the FNLWGT as this data was not actually relevant, as it rather classified how many individuals may represent in that group, and there were way too many individuals than actual individuals in the real world. Then the next step was taking the various variables that we had and getting rid of outliers. For example, this age variable had numerous outliers as seen in the code between 19 and 24, checking for these outliers. This demonstrates that there are 121 outliers in total, with all of those outliers being above the maximum, as demonstrated in line 27. These outliers were then accounted for using the average age in this circumstance in order to get rid of outliers and make the data clean. This occurred for all continuous variables, checking for outliers. The only variable that was continuous that we did not change outliers for was hours worked, because hours worked are a direct indication of how much an individual makes in the US, as many individuals only have one main source of income. Following that, we had to check the variables that were not continuous variables, such as work class. In work class, you can see that without pay has 14 individuals and never worked has 7 individuals. These data sets are way too small and have way too few representatives in order to actually be meaningful. Therefore, these answers were consolidated as seen in lines 35 and line 36. In line 37, missing values were distributed proportionally based on what the previous values were done. And this was done across all non-continuous variables that had missing cells. This allowed for the cleaning of missing cells throughout the data set. Demonstrated in 38, 37 demonstrates the proportions, and 38 demonstrates the filling of these proportions, respectively. This allowed for a clean, workable data set throughout with no missing values and no outliers aside from hours worked in order to represent our models. Following this, we use descriptive analytics to answer our first question of what percentage of people in each occupation make over $50,000 annually. And from this, we were trying to find what occupations are most likely to make over $50,000 a year. And from this, we found that the executive or managerial occupation and the professional specialty are most likely to make these totals. This demonstrates that these are the most likely professions to make over $50,000 a year, meaning if an individual is seeking to make over $50,000 a year, they should head in that direction of profession. This data is later used in the modeling in order to do our optimization question.
One of our prescriptive analysis questions was using all explanatory variables, what level of education is expected from an individual. Now, in order to answer this question, we had to run a linear regression model because our desired model response variable was on a continuous scale. And the actual desired model response variable was education num, which the variable is denoted by an integer, which represents the education level of an individual. For example, education num of 11 would represent someone who completed 11th grade, whereas an education num of 13th would represent someone who has completed the first year bachelor's degree. The two variables that were dropped were education and income. Now, education had to be dropped because that variable was actually denoted by the category of education that individual is in. For example, high school, bachelor's, or postgrad. This had to be dropped because this was directly correlated to education num and provided a false analysis on the model's accuracy results. Income variable also had to be dropped because that was a dependent variable in our actual data set and was not useful for analysis. One of the things we also did was use a forward stepwise algorithm in order to find the optimal number of predictor variables. One of the things we also did for the linear regression model was just the common procedure to do modeling, which includes standardizing all variables on a continuous scale in order to make sure they all have equal weight and importance to the model, as well as train testing our data for the model. Now, with the actual optimal predictor variables, the algorithm was able to find the top 5 ranked predictor variables, which include occupation, professional specialty, occupation, executive, managerial, native country, North America, occupation sales, and occupation tech support. The 39 of the 42 available predictor variables was found to be the most optimal by the forward stepwise algorithm, as shown on the table on the right. There's a general trend of higher model accuracy the more variables are included, but we can see that this increase in model accuracy diminishes on an exponential scale, meaning that the more variables are included, the less increase you see in model accuracy. So although the optimal predictor variables was 39 of the available 42, we can see that at that range, it's nearly all the same. Now, for our linear regression modeling results, after partitioning the data and using optimal predictor variables, these were the values that we had for our R-squared, RMSE, and adjusted R-squared. Now, these values are fairly similar to the ones outputted by our forward stepwise algorithm, which actually did not use a train test solution in order to find those. And this shows how train testing our data provided the expected model accuracy we wanted that was produced by a forward stepwise algorithm. And our linear regression model equation, this is the equation that was outputted by our actual linear regression model. Only the top 5 ranked predictor variables were used in order for simplicity, but this shows how all of these variables, except for occupational professional specialty, actually decrease one's education, and occupational professional specialty is the only one that actually increases it. And the individual is assumed to start at a 9th and a half grade level before taking into account all the variables, adding or subtracting one's education level. Now, while these model results are subpar, they still demonstrate a relationship and provide a limited real-world application analysis. For example, randomly chosen individuals' explanatory variables were used to predict the education level, and that individual's actual education level was 11th, while the predicted education level by the model is 10. So this shows how it's not spot on accurate, but as previously mentioned, it still provides a limited real world application analysis and can be used for further analysis for other factors as well.
To answer the question, what types of individuals are most likely to make over $50,000 annually, we did both supervised and unsupervised learning. To start, we set income as the independent variable and all other variables as the dependent variables. From there, we standardized all of the non-binary variables, which was age, education number, capital gain, capital loss, and hours per week worked. From there, we trained the data. We got a ratio of 24.08, as 17,303 people did not make over $50,000 annually, and only 5,489 did. We would have liked this number to be at least 35. However, since far more people made less than $50,000 annually, we assumed that this number would be all right in this instance. However, there could be some bias in our models. From there, we ran various models such as logistic regression, support vector machine, k-nearest neighbor, decision trees, and random forests. Upon doing this, we found that logistic regression was the only model that was not overfit. We got an 85% accuracy in both the tests and training, which seemed to be acceptable in this instance. For the unsupervised model, we used centroids as we felt it would give us the best picture into what specific groups of individuals make over $50,000 annually. The setup was the exact same as the supervised learning in the sense that we had to scale the non-binary variables and train the data set. From there, we deduced that we should set the number of clusters to 5 per the results of the ELBO method. We decided that it would be more beneficial to print the centroid data rather than show it in charts due to the high number of dummy variables not giving concise results graphically. We also felt that it was easier to read a CSV file rather than look at 53 individual graphs. Unsupervised learning provided outcomes that demonstrated relationships between those making over or under $50,000 annually. The variables most likely to allow an individual to make over $50,000 include higher education, being a male, high capital gains, older age, and low capital losses. The unsupervised learning methodology found that Centroid 2 represents the individual most likely to make over $50,000 annually. An individual working in the private sector has the optimal work class compared to local and state sectors and self-employment. A primary college education was the most important education level that someone needed to obtain. However, education was not as huge of a factor in making over $50,000. Professional specialty sales, executive, or managerial roles yielded the best chance to meet the $50,000 threshold, but were not as important as initially anticipated. The most optimal relation status is married, while unmarried individuals have a chance of meeting the threshold. The Caucasian race grants the highest probability of making over $50,000. Likewise, being an American gave an individual a higher chance of making over $50,000. With race and nationality, there is some explicit bias, as the majority of the data came from individuals falling into the demographic of Caucasian males born in the United States, which represent both the highest proportion of the data set as a whole, as well as the centroid. Income under the threshold is correlated to being a younger worker, having minimal capital gains, and having marginal capital losses. Our data suggests that both men and women are likely to make less than $50,000. Working in local and state governments, as well as being self-employed, are all factors that equate to having an income lower than the threshold. Most individuals who make less than the threshold only hold a high school degree with no college education. Never marrying is another factor that leads to lower income, as it is thought that these people typically lack drive. Working in service tends to make less money than other professions, as these jobs are typically hourly and make less than a wage position. Caucasian Americans also tend to make less than the threshold, confirming that there is bias within the data set in Centroid, due to the volume of Caucasian Americans compared to any other demographic.
So let's talk about the optimization question, which is, given the people most likely to earn over $50,000, which of these people should a bank most likely give a loan to, based on their capital gain? This question is from a banker's perspective, who is going to give out loans based on the capital gain of each individual. The input is the group of individuals most likely to earn over $50,000 obtained from the first prescriptive analytics question. This group consists of 1,378 individuals, of which only 150 can receive a loan. Furthermore, the bank is rather progressive and wants to give out loans as diverse as possible. To ensure this requested diversity, restrictions on gender, education level, birthplace, and race are in place. Now we come to the optimization model. The goal of the model is to maximize the capital gain. The decision variable used is binary and indicates whether an individual is granted a loan or not. In order to ensure the aforementioned diversity of the loans, some restrictions are in place. These are that a maximum of 150 loans can be given out, of which a maximum of 50% can go to men, a maximum of 70% can go to people with a bachelor's degree or higher, a maximum of 90% can go to people born in the US, and a maximum of 85% can go to white individuals. On the right side of the slide, we see the alternative formulation of the model, which contains all the restraints. There you can also see the total number of applicants, which is 1,378. Next, I talk about the model's results. These show that 45.33% of all loans went to women, 34% of all loans went to individuals with a high school degree or less, 10% of all loans went to individuals who were not born in the US, and 15.33% of all loans went to non-white people. They also show that all restraints, except the one that refers to the level of education, are binding. Moreover, it can be assumed that if no restrictions had been in place, even more loans would have gone to Caucasian males born in the US. Thus, the desired diversity would not have been achieved without the restrictions.
In conclusion, of those in the United States at the time, the main contributing factors to those making over $50,000 annually are the occupation of the individual and if the individual had capital gains in the previous year. The analysis that we've done created a group of individuals most likely to earn over $50,000 annually using unsupervised learning models. A bank can then use this group of individuals and whatever constraints they prefer to determine who out of those is the most likely to make over $50,000 should actually receive one of their loans. Future analysis could pertain to the same or similar questions and compare how the United States and the income of individuals has changed over the course of time.